Good day again, everyone. My name is David Merrill. I'm a systems engineer with Polarian Software, and today it is my privilege to talk to you about team collaboration in software and product development. If you can hear my voice, then you've already joined the audio broadcast, and you can use your speakers or headset to listen. I would invite you and really encourage you to ask questions via the WebEx questions and answer or Q&A or chat panel. If you address the questions to all panelists, I will be able to see them. And from time to time, I will pause in my presentation and look for questions in the Q&A and chat and address them directly. So if possible, we'll be able to make this webinar as interactive as you would like it to be. Now today, it's important to note that I am talking about team collaboration in both product and software development. So I'm not only going to be focused on topics pertaining to software creation and manufacture, but also all products, all methodologies. My presentation today is fairly simple from its agenda. I'll begin with a brief overview of the Polarian platform and Polarian as a company, and move directly into a Polarian demonstration. As I mentioned, you certainly are welcome to submit questions while I'm speaking, but at the end of the presentation, I will also pause for direct questions and answers. So if you would like to see a different function or go deeper into a specific topic, you're welcome to ask it at that point, and I will segue or open up the product and show that part of the demonstration as you ask. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about next steps, what you can do with what we're talking about today is interesting for you. So we'll go ahead and begin. I should also say that today's presentation is being recorded, so if you have colleagues that weren't able to join, then feel free to email us and we'll be able to distribute the link where you can download this recorded presentation. Well, millions of people use Polarian worldwide, and the Polarian solution is broken into three major categories. The first is Polarian requirements, where issues of eliciting requirements and developing the needs and assessments of your products and services are important. We also have Polarian QA, where you can establish test management and quality assurance methods that link to requirements but isolated directly for the QA topics. All of these functions are surrounded by or enveloped with Polarian ALM, or Application Lifecycle Management, that includes all features and all functions of the Polarian code base. They share a single install. So when you install Polarian requirements, you're also installing Polarian ALM, and the different products are activated by licensing solutions. So it's not unusual for some customers to have some ALM licenses, some requirements licenses, and some quality assurance licenses to be provisioned in their stakeholder group according to role and function. And this helps economize or reduce the overall cost of the solution. Now, it just so happens today I'm speaking to you from one of our customers who happens to be involved in the aerospace industry. This is an example of a Polarian customer that doesn't just develop software, but develops hardware and software and everything that integrates them together into something that we'll call mechatronics. So when we deal with Polarian customers, we see that any methods are required. We see that the needs for traceability and quality and developing requirements and maintaining change management are all present in various forms. In the aerospace and medical industry, there's a heavy need for compliance and regulatory solutions so that audits can be performed and defended through the product development cycle. Additionally, if you happen to be a software company which follows an agile methodology, then agile development can be part of the overall approach and framework of your projects. But if you follow a more intensive V model or waterfall method, then you can again be able to establish all of the workflows and requirements that will allow for consistent validation and verification through all steps of the product development cycle. So the Polarian customer drives Polarian itself. Here's a list of some of the Polarian customers, and as I mentioned to you, I'm speaking today visiting one of these customers that's on this list. You'll see on this list represented medical companies, software companies, as well as banking, and medical and aerospace companies. Let's talk a little bit about how the Polarian model accomplishes this solution. So the architecture for Polarian is built on top of a very solid, very reliable repository where web services and indexing agents will give quick access to all the data and metadata of your product development needs. It's surfaced by functional blocks in the web server so that you can actually extend and add to the constructs of a Polarian server by using the interfaces of open APIs available to Java development or web services for WSDL plugins to your existing internet applications. And the common set of clients are defined simply by web browsers. There is no need for an installable client with Polarian. We will be able to access the Polarian server as effectively on a Macintosh running Firefox as I can from a Windows PC running Internet Explorer or Google Chrome. And indeed, it doesn't even have to be a PC. Effectively, we can use tablet devices such as iPad and Android and mobile phones to be able to bring the information directly to the stakeholder, whether you're on a plane, train, or automobile, or at the office. However, if there is development being done in such integrated development environments like Eclipse and Visual Studio, there are solid and deep plugins to be able to bring the Polarian data directly to those development environments so that a developer needn't have to transfer to a browser interface in order to find out what are the tasks for that developer to perform that day. They will be able to quickly perform the task, save and commit the information to repositories, and move on to the next task at hand, all from the application that they currently use today. We will also see how Polarian plugs directly into Office applications, which are common, like Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. And moving over to the right-hand side of the architecture, as we have to plug into other existing data sources, third-party applications that might already hold bug tracking or issue information or testing information. Polarian offers a very powerful live bus integrator and adapter, as well as customer and partner supplied extensions, which gives us really a rich ecosystem of contributions to be able to help you as a user extend how Polarian behaves in your environment. So everything that I talk about today will be built on this common context. If we looked at what a configuration looked like in a typical enterprise organization, we would see really just one Polarian server located globally and accessed by all stakeholders. These stakeholders can be inside the company. They could also be external stakeholders such as customers, suppliers, vendors, and auditors. And we can integrate directly into existing enterprise structures such as POP servers for email and LDAP or Active Directory for user authentication. Additionally, if you already have source code and material stored in external repositories from Polarian, we'll be able to monitor those subversion and Git repositories to be able to tie into the existing methods that you have today for storing your data files. Well, let's talk a little bit about team collaboration for a moment. What happens when team collaboration fails? Recently, in April of 2010, McAfee released an antivirus patch that caused tens of thousands of computers to crash and burn, causing serious outages for its customers. It was reported in the Tech Herald that some of the existing quality assurance processes that were native to McAfee were not followed. Peer review of the driver was not done, a risk assessment was questionable, and ultimately they released software that wasn't ready. And in response to this, McAfee themselves asserted that they would make sure that they put in the process in place so that this would never happen again. Well, Polarian exists to be able to avoid such team collaboration failures. And let's talk about how we do that. First off, we want to introduce a challenge to take the concept of requirements and very closely tightly integrate them with test cases. We're going to do this by eliminating untraceable documents. No longer will you have to keep a Word document on a file system or a SharePoint server that is detached from the rest of your development process. We'll be able to easily import things like test specifications and begin to manage the individual test cases, not the test documents themselves. You will no longer need to have your test information stored on an Excel file someplace on somebody's machine or desktop or file system for your test engineers to access and keep current with the requirements. We'll be able to collaborate using Word and Excel through a special feature called Round Trip. And most especially, we'll show you how to link these test cases to requirements. Well, let's begin right now. I'm going to bring up my Polarian interface, which is running on Firefox on my Macintosh. And here on the left-hand side, I'm going to click on this tab, which brings me to a home page, a central landing point for what's called the eLibrary demonstration project. Now, this is not the only way that you can show and operate a project. It's just an example of the type of project you would expect to see if you were maintaining a library where people check out books, reserve content, and perhaps even download electronic books. It's a fictitious project as an example. In fact, if you go to the Polarian online demonstration, you will be able to transfer directly to the same eLibrary demo project I'm looking at today. The Polarian interface is broken into two major sections. On the left-hand side is the navigation pane that moves me through the different contexts of both operation and project. In the right-hand side is the workspace. The workspace is going to give me the information that I'm browsing to in the navigation. In this case, the home page for the eLibrary project, where it can give me summaries of what is there to do in this project. I will build and elicit requirements and specifications. I'll take those requirements and easily organize them into releases. I can optionally include risk management like a failure mode and effect analysis risk assessment. And all three of these components can be delivered to and fulfilled by the development process itself. And once development is undergoing and reaching completeness, we'll be able to access the testing space where quality assurance and testing practices can be performed like test runs, whether they're automated unit tests or manual regression tests performed by a test engineer. Well, let's go directly into the requirement specification. When I click on that link, I'll bring up the specification page for my project, which will show me all the different Polarian specification documents that exist. Now, these specification documents are very different than the Word documents that you might have on your file system. They're truly views into the Polarian data, into the requirements that are organized in a document-friendly way. Let me show you a little bit how that looks. I'm going to open up this user requirement specification. And when I do so, you'll get the idea that everything in Polarian is linked together. Everything is actionable. The table of contents will let me browse quickly to sections within the document, or I can page through the document as I normally would in a tool like Microsoft Word. And I can see headings, unstructured or plain text, as well as I move throughout the document, I'll move into a section where I can see and visualize specific requirements. So the icon here on the left-hand side tells me that this is a Polarian artifact or work item. And if I click in this field, you can see that the bar on the left-hand side is highlighted. And I can begin to modify and refine this just as I would any other Word document. For example, this particular requirement deals with the eLibrary logon portal. And I might want to say if this was a university application, that including Google and Facebook accounts, I want to tie into a university student database. And I can very easily manipulate and change these settings. So if I don't want to offer Google accounts, I can just highlight and press the delete button as I normally would. I can insert tables, or in this case, let me attach an image file. And so I can move quickly to where I might have a particular image stored. I'll move here to this folder. I will pull up a specific image that becomes part of my artifact. I can add bullet points and resize just like I would in a normal Word document. When I click Save, here in the upper left, I'm going to save this document. I suppose I introduced an error, so let me refresh this document, and I'll do that process again. So moving down into my requirement as before, I'll go ahead and attach that same image file, and I'll resize it and then save this. When I save this record, well, I guess I've really introduced a problem here. My apologies. We'll return to this a little bit later. One area that I can go to always is the My Polarian page. On the My Polarian page, I will be able to see all of the tasks and defects which are specifically assigned to me. I can take action on them right away. So if I had a particular defect which was critical, I can visualize that here, click on the defect, and begin working to resolve the defect, or assign it to someone else, or collaborate by adding comments and status changes. So for example, if it was time for me to work on this particular defect, I can move it into Start Progress. If I want to add specific comments, I can notify my team, hey team, I'm starting this. And when I create these comments can be visible not just to my particular session, but rather to everybody who has visibility to this particular defect document. I can also add additional assignees, so if I really did need some extra help, I can pull in that key developer to view and work on this particular defect with me. I can assign initial estimate values, like I think it's going to take me a couple of days to work. And when I click Save, I'll be able to commit all of this information to the Polarian repository. Additionally, here in the upper part of the work item information, you can see links between the test case when executed and failed, created this defect. We'll take a look at that a little bit later on. But as I build different approaches to resolving this defect, I can again begin to collaborate with adding specific follow-up tasks. So here's an example of requesting a peer review on defect changes. And this particular task I might assign to someone like ArchTest. And when I create this task, the task is assigned to Mark and is again permanently linked to the defect and my originating request to create it. I can continue and create other types of associated artifacts. So if this particular defect created another defect, if from this defect I needed to add a change request, I can take action directly from this screen while I'm working on the defect itself. Well, let's go back to the specification page for just a moment. And I'll go there by clicking on the specification logo in my navigation bar. And instead of opening an existing document, let's take a look at the rest of this page. What we see here is, let me make a little more space here. You see a V board or a V model emulation that shows me that I have business cases, user requirements, and functional requirements, all in various stages of eliciting the specification. This corresponds to the workflow here on the right-hand side, where I have initial draft stages, as well as review states and approved or rejected statuses that become important to the overall workflow of my requirements. The goal, of course, is to move things from the specification area into the production area where development now works on those specifications, and into the verified areas where associated test cases have been executed against the requirements for particular product prototypes or builds or manufacturing events. Down below here you can see that traceability can be viewed immediately, and we'll cover that in just a moment. Let me pause for just a second and see if there's any questions. Okay. So there is a question, is that the audio broadcast is interrupting, and I certainly apologize for that, but right now there is no possibility to join a telephone conference. If you have extended difficulties, I would recommend that you visit Polarian.com, or perhaps also have access to the recorded session, which you can view later on. Well, in viewing this specification space, one of the principal questions that comes up often is, how do I get my documents into Polarian quickly and efficiently? And I'll do that with the Import Document button. So when I import a document, I'm offered to browse directly to the document that I want to import. And here I have a Microsoft Word 2007 document. And I'll specify that in my file location. Now, before I begin importing this, I'm going to move to my Microsoft virtual machine, where we can take a look at what this document looks like before we import it. You can see that it has a page header, some title information, contents, as well as the kind of pro forma or detailed information in many requirements documents. Now when we move into the second section here, we see the formation of real requirements. Now this is going to be the majority of our focus, to bring these requirements from the free text that we see here in the document into structured artifacts within Polarian. So now I'm going to bring us back to the Polarian user interface, and I'll continue the import process. When I click the next button, it will open up that same document that we just looked at, but in a preview mode. So you can see that it looks very much like what we saw in the Word interface. But as we move down through here, instead of just being unstructured text all the way through, specific areas have been annotated with an icon and a vertical bar here that indicate that this has been found to be a requirement. Now, how that happens depends on the right-hand side here. I can enter in the document name. I can choose the space or the location where this document should go. Maybe instead of a requirement specification, this might be a testing plan, or perhaps it's a risk analysis spreadsheet. And so specific spaces can be designed and created to contain special information depending on your product or service or project. The rules section here tells me that I'm going to mark paragraphs from the entire document as a requirement if it contains the words must or should. So it uses natural language to be able to find what requirements have been labeled in the document. And you can add to these word lists and make them more complex as necessary. In fact, there's a whole set of criteria that we can choose from regular expressions to formatting styles. So if I take a look here at 2.2, Administration Interfaces, I see that I have a couple of bullet points which are not included as requirements. And if I would really desire those bullet points to become sub-requirements of the parent, this requirement set here, then I just need to select the criteria to say if the paragraph contains a list item, then it also should be created as a requirement. And clicking the preview button again, I'll refactor that document with the new criteria, so that if I move to section 2.2, we can see that it now has 2 additional requirements. Now these numbers here on the left-hand side are temporary values because I haven't saved this document yet. If I have tables that I want to include in requirements, I can open up some advanced options to be able to say if the next paragraph happens to contain a table, then that will be included in the requirement. If this happens to be a set of user requirements, then I can set all the fields necessary for requirement type. So since I know this is going to be a user requirement document, I can set that value for user requirement for each and every artifact that's created. I could click preview again, and it would refactor that document and display the new information. So as I move down, I'll be able to see that the table is now included within this original requirement. I could certainly continue. I could add additional work item rules, but for the purposes of our presentation, I think I'm done, and so now I will formally import the document. And when I do that, I commit all of the changes to this document into the Polarian repository. And once it is in Polarian, it's no longer a single user, single-use document. Many users can open this document and make changes simultaneously. So even though I, as an individual user, would move directly to it to say it must be possible to easily refine requirements using word skills. So I can just start typing, and I can add my bullet points and list items as necessary. If I find that I need to add a new requirement, I just have to press Enter and create a new requirement here indicated by this temporary ID. And when I'm satisfied with my editing session, I'll click Save and commit these changes to the Polarian repository. Again, it's only one person making changes right now. However, many people could be making changes to other aspects of the document. Let's continue. Suppose I wanted to say, rather than looking at just the basic information that we see here, just the details of work item ID and description, what if I want to start looking at the rest of the rich attributes and detail of a Polarian artifact? Well, here in the upper right-hand side, if I move from this document view icon to the tree view icon, I will be able to visualize the Polarian requirements not so much in a document form, but in a table view. More like a database, more like an Excel spreadsheet, I guess, but still oriented with the hierarchy and heading information of the original document. Here I can find all the requirements that I want to take action on, perhaps highlight all of them, and make changes to important parts of the requirement. So for example, I might want to say that it's time for me not to just have this be a draft of a requirement, but it's time to review it, or perhaps quickly approve and accept this. And I could add comments to say, quick approval based on change management board meeting, and save this information. When I save this, it's important to note that key required areas like mandatory fields have to be satisfied. So moving down through my available set of information, I can add custom fields to be able to set the appropriate target release values. And if I still miss everything, Polarian will keep me on track to include all the mandatory settings that I have to have before I can satisfy the workflow conditions to move it from quickly approve and accept. Boy, I'm really forgetting a bunch of them today. But it's a good example to demonstrate that the Polarian workflow enforces not just what information is in the specific requirement, but also who had authority to move that particular requirement through its different workflow states from draft to approved to accepted. But that can be done for one requirement as easily as it can be done for an entire requirement document. Let's move forward then. Suppose now I start needing to communicate this information, this building requirements document, back to my stakeholders. I need them to be able to review it. I need them to be able to make comments and contribute to its refinement. But they don't have access to Polarian. I'll accomplish this by using the word round trip feature. And so in the same document view that we've been working on, I'll come up here to the action gear and select word round trip. Now, word round trip comes in two pieces, exporting the document and then importing the changes. We're going to do the first one, exporting this document back to Word. And I have three major modes to choose from. Only allowing the stakeholder to review, allowing the stakeholder to make prioritization changes, and full collaboration. This is the view that will let the stakeholder make changes to the title, to the description, as well as the attributes and field information. So I'll click Start here and begin the export process. And so what I'm going to do is save this into my folder, just like you would if you were going to attach it to a web page or to a SharePoint server or send it as an email. And now I'm going to move back over to my Microsoft Word application, and we'll close this file out, and we'll open the file that we've just exported. And so you can see right away that it has maintained the original header. It has the title information. All I need to do is update the table of contents for this particular view, and I'll see the same table of contents. And then as I move through the document, I see the same heading information, the same unstructured text and images. But as I move down into the requirements area, not only do I have the information as it appeared in Polarian, but I have the ability to make changes in here. So Word can be used to modify requirements. So the stakeholders that are used to using Word and Excel can continue to use Word and Excel to contribute to this refinement of any work item, whether it's a requirement, a test case, or tasks. If I want to change certain values, I'll be able to change, for example, the severity from should have to must have, just like I would if I were in Polarian itself. And if instead of making direct input into a requirement, I want to make a comment, I can position my cursor anywhere where I'd like to leave that comment and select the Word Review feature to insert a Word comment. And my comment might be something like, user management is essential to be secure. Do we have security settings? So this is a comment which is placed in the document, very important from a stakeholder, very important for the overall collaboration, because it might actually cause me to make changes to the set of requirements or perhaps add new ones. Well, once I've gone through as a stakeholder and made all the different comments that I might want to do, so user accounts, important, and that there's no limit really to not only how many things I can change in this document, but I could save this document and send it to a colleague and they could make changes. I would have visibility into the regular Word track changes policies, as well as being able to do what I'm going to do now, save it individually and communicate this file back to my Polarian contact. So having saved this to my file system, I'm going to go back and open up the Polarian browser. And now inside Polarian, I'm ready for the second part of the Word round trip process, importing the changes. I'll highlight the specific document that I just saved and bring it back into Polarian. So it will take all of the specific changes that I made and bring those changes back into Polarian. Let's go ahead and continue our team collaboration, because once I establish the requirements here, I'd like to make sure that I can build the traceability between requirements and test cases. So if I come back to my specification space, you'll see that as I have added specific requirements, they will show up in my e-model or dashboard of progress for those specifications. So since we added our new document, we can see it here showing up in my document view list, but also all of the new user requirements have been added to my overall total of requirements. And I can evaluate whether or not these requirements do or do not have test cases assigned to them. And I can even look at the test case traceability table, which will give me a very compact two-dimensional table with 3 columns to show me all of the requirements in my system, all the requirements that map to specific test cases, or rather test cases that cover those requirements, and any particular defect where that test case has failed. If I'm missing coverage, then, like for example here, I don't have a test case that validates the requirement EL 130. I can take action directly. I can click on EL 130 and I can build my test case directly from Polarian without having to go anywhere else. So from EL 130, I can certainly add a verifying test case, and it will pull certain fields from the original record. These are fields that you can change, and allow me to build and refine a test case just as well as I would if I was doing it from any other location. So test number 1, log into Polarian, verify online, result. Whatever the test steps and expected results can be listed here in the description field or added as specific custom fields anywhere within the test case record itself. If this is a special type of test, like detailed or a smoke test, I can indicate it here. If I have time dedicated to evolving this particular test step or performing the test in an environment, then I can indicate it here as well. I'll click Create, and now instead of just simply creating a test case by itself, that test case has been created and linked to EL130. If I return back to my test case traceability table and refresh it, I'll be able to re-query the information to see exactly the current state of all test cases and how they map specifically to my requirements. Let me pause for a moment and see if there's any questions. Okay, there's a question. Images and attachment files can be added to documents, but is it possible to add MS Office or MS Visio objects directly to the documents? Polarian document views do not support Office and Visio objects being inserted as OLE objects. However, let me show you, it's an excellent question by the way, let me show you one particular way in which you can attach specific rich document structures. So if I come back to this particular work item that we were just looking at, EL130, and I needed to attach a Visio document or a Word document to this as a resource, as I move through the different attributes, you can see that I have approvals, I have link provisions, which can apply directly to source code that's been checked into a repository, and attachments. So here, I can browse to a file of any type, whether it's a bitmap or a rich document structure, and attach this to the requirement. And so the title for this might be vendor specs. And that was somehow utilized originally in how I refined and created this requirement. When I choose Save Now, what happens is that that file is not just being saved, but rather it's being brought under revision control in a Subversion repository. So I will be able to maintain and show those revisions as effectively from this area as if I had checked them directly into Subversion with a Subversion client set. So this is one way that attachments can be linked directly to a specific requirement. And if I wanted to include a specific screen capture, I can certainly open the file and place the screen capture into this rich text field description. That's an excellent question. And there really is no limitation to what type of file can be inserted in this process. Okay, well, let's go back to our PowerPoint for just a moment, because we've talked about what we have to do to eliminate untraceable documents. In fact, I heard from a customer, or rather a prospective customer, that they had to do something which they called perform traceability. And what that meant for them is, after a certain period of time when requirements were being refined and stored in documents on the file system and test cases were in Excel spreadsheets, it was time to make sure that they all traced together. So they stopped what they were doing and opened all these documents and built the links between them. Those links were only good for a certain period of time until the documents were again changed. And it took them an enormous amount of manual time in order to establish that traceability. In Polarian, traceability is instantaneous, as we've seen. That we can manage the individual work items, the tests, not just the documents. We've seen how we've linked test cases to requirements. Now, we want to make sure that the information is always available. So we want to make sure that when we make a change, that the information is accessible to all stakeholders. Well, let's take a look at that. Well, first off, we've talked about web-based access, that this information is always going to be available. Test cases can be executed on a tablet just as effectively as a computer. Traceability matrices, as we've seen, are always ready in wikis and included in documents from time to time. We also have development burn-down charts, so let's see what that looks like in Polarian. Well, first off, we've been looking primarily in these main views, but I also have additional information. If I open up the navigation pane, I can see initial dashboards, which will communicate project status to managers and executives, including information about burn down and project completion. Now, this is a fictitious project. It doesn't actually have any work done to it, so these graphs are empty. But as I move down to look at things like the live plan, you can see that as I make assignments to individuals, I'll be able to visualize their capacity and the work items or the tasks that have been assigned to them. And I can move through the entire life cycle of my particular project and see all the individuals working on all the different development iterations. And key quality scorecard information can be displayed to show how well am I tracking standards for release planning, for planning development iterations, as well as maintaining schedule, and also opening up specific information about the quality of the work items themselves. So I can look at a work items quality page that shows me how well am I estimating the value or the time that will take to fill a requirement, and then once the work is being done, am I being able to actually deliver on time? So you can see here that 94 of my work items right now do not have time estimates. That's something I might want to change, and if I do, I can hyperlink directly to all 94 of those work items and take action. And so moving down through all of these metrics, you can see that the information is available and then always actionable. Well, another view that's very important is the work items view. So here in my project, I have different types of work items or artifacts. We've talked about requirements, we've talked about test cases, and we've talked about specific tasks. But I also have the ability to create different types of work items in a custom way, project by project or globally for the entire organization. I have business cases, I have change requests, defects, risks, and this also has a functional specification. Well, I can look at something which is called an impact tree, or viewing the relationship of all of my requirements to all of the other associated work items. And I'll do that by moving to the tree view and defining how many levels deep I want to view in my impact or in my impact hierarchy. And so as I move through the view, you can see requirements that relate to other requirements. And in fact, moving down to some of the more evolved parts of this project, we'll be able to see that here also I can see requirements which are linked to test cases linked to other test cases. Here we see a very robust scenario where a requirement has a risk item, and the risk item has tasks and test cases assigned to it. And in order to mitigate the risk, a change request has been created. And from the change request, a new requirement. And so I can examine what is the impact if I happen to change the value and the information of EL 352. And so from here, I can view and visualize that information. In fact, you can see here that I have a special icon which is put aside this risk item, where this particular risk work item has been assigned a suspect link because something about this particular requirement has changed. Well, at any time in Polarian, I can always view the changes. So here on the History tab, I can click and see exactly who did the change, when did the change happen, and what was the change. So here we can see that the requirement that we're looking at was changed in its severity from should have to will not have. Well, how does that affect a particular risk item? Well, perhaps it means that the risk item is no longer applicable. So I can return back to my original requirement, move to the risk item, and say, well, let's say that we'll create a comment to say requirement changed, risk is no longer valid. And inserting in that comment, I can also say that I've resolved this suspect link. So I'll remove the suspect link from the record. And moving back in, I can also change the status to say, all right, one of the things that happens now, since it no longer applies, I'll perform the action called rejected. And this basically means that it's invalid and will give me some very important status information that I can view later on. So when I modify that risk, it clears the suspect flag. And if I look at the original parent requirement, you can see that I've cleared the icon away from that particular risk item. And at any time, any stakeholder can view any artifact and look at all of the historic changes that have affected that particular item. So here we can see from its beginning on April 13th, this work item has undergone periodic change. I will always be able to see what that change was, and I can even click directly on a specific revision number and see that risk item as it existed in that point in time. So there's full visibility across all work items in all phases of all projects. Let me pause just a moment and see if there's any questions. Okay, I'll continue. Let's return back to our PowerPoint slide for a moment. So we've seen some burn down charts and we've talked about the change impact hierarchies. Let's now see how all artifacts are going to become actionable. Well, one way is that we take information and we put that information into wiki collaborations. All the pages that we've been viewing so far are exposed as wiki pages. Those wiki pages can be collaborated by peers to include information as well as reporting data from Polarian itself. We can use these wiki pages to monitor the requirements and other artifact approvals and directly manage the task items. We can also use artifacts to track time and job assignments. Well, let's see how this works. Suppose I come back to my Polarian user interface, and let's take a look at, instead of the specification space, let's look at the testing space. Very much like the specifications, the testing area gives me some information about how I'm organizing my test plans, what my test coverage would be, and open and executing test runs. So you can see that I can track these test runs, whether they were successful or whether they failed over time. I can always take a look at, for example, what went into the failure of this particular automated build. So if I click directly on that link, I will see the results of the test run that was executed by the Polarian continuous integration process. And rather than having to manually create tests associated with the automated test, the automated test itself has created test cases and executed them. And here we see that one test case has failed as part of its unit test, and one test case has been blocked. All of this is actionable. So I can click on this test case and open up and look at the deeper details, the more pertinent information associated to understanding whether this test case is correctly written, whether or not this test case is appropriately linking to a requirement, and any particular defects are associated to it. This clock icon tells me that I'm looking at a historical version of this test case. If I want to show the current information, I'll be able to then visualize any defects which have been attributed to this particular failed test case. We can see here that this automated test case is verifying or covering the requirement for the login page. And moving down through here, I can also visualize the last test records that this has generated. And you can see, because it's an automated test that has periodically failed and the defect hasn't yet been resolved, rather than creating new defects, it links to existing defects. Custom fields may be set to visualize and put more of the attribute information that you need to have in your work items. Let's move back into my testing space. Another thing that is directly actionable from Polarian inside the wiki page is being able to create test runs right away. We'll create one called Team Webinar. And let's make this a user acceptance test. Now this test is ready for a tester or a developer to begin to execute. I can execute it directly from the user interface, or I could also use the Excel round trip feature to export this testing information into an Excel format where a tester can execute in an offline mode, or perhaps I'm passing a series of tests to a third party or independent testing facility. All of this information on the wiki page is actionable. If I want to look at what those test cases are, I can click directly on these and see exactly what those test cases are. And if some of these test cases are no longer valid, I can adjust what the status is of that particular test case. So here's one that perhaps should be marked not just as active, but deactivated. And deactivating a test case is a little bit like rejecting a requirement. It means that, at least for a while, it's going to be inactive and will not be part of specific test runs. Using Polarian in this mode allows the users to collaborate one with another by changing those things to which they have rights and being able to have other people visualize those changes in the rest of the project structure. Now, it's also important to note that even though I've been dealing directly in this eLibrary project, I can set up a rich organization of project groups. These projects can be organized by functional teams, by products, by features, really by any particular hierarchy. So if I wanted to look, for example, at something called the Drive Pilot project, I'll be able to see not just information about eLibrary, but rather information as it pertains to a mechatronics Drive Pilot project, which represents the type of project you might have for an automotive pilot, or an autopilot for automobiles. And so inside the requirements and design specifications of this project, I'll have many more work items than just requirements. In fact, you can see here that I've mixed system requirements with mechanical high-level and design specifications, as well as software high-level requirements and design specifications. As a Polarian user with the appropriate rights, you will be able to create as many artifacts as necessary. Well, we're coming to the end of our presentation today, and so I'd like to just summarize some of the things that we've seen. We've seen project dashboards and wiki information being shared amongst users. We've been able to capture and manage requirements and test cases with Polarian Live documents. We've been able to see the comments, been able to look at the suspect work items, and track things like tasks and risk items. All along, all the information that we have here is available for collaboration with our team members, with external stakeholders, using Microsoft Office and Word round trip. The next steps I would encourage you to take are to download a free 30-day trial. The same eLibrary application that you saw me use today, you can download onto your own PC or Linux system, as well as into a server, and run for 30 days with an unlimited and open trial. If you want to try something a little bit easier, you can go live and take an online test drive directly from the Polarian web server at polarian.com. You can also request a proof of concept or a demonstration.